You have seen Alex Eala walk onto a tennis court and take down some of the best players alive. Swiatek, Pegula, Keys. Names that most fans only see on television, but here is what almost nobody talks about. Before any of that happened, before a single camera cared who she was, there was a 4-year-old girl standing on a lone hard court at a country club in the Philippines, holding a racket almost too big for her hands. And the person who put that racket there was not a coach hired by a tennis academy. It was her own grandfather. So here is the question worth sitting with for a second. When you watch Eala celebrate a win today, who exactly are you watching win? Is it just her? Or is every single one of those victories actually shared by people who spent years in the background making choices most fans will never hear about? Because behind every athlete who breaks through, there is almost always a family that made decisions long before the world was paying attention. Decisions about money, about time, about whether to keep believing in something with absolutely no guarantee it would work out. This video is not about the matches you have already seen highlights of. This is about the people who built the foundation underneath all of it. A mother who once stood on a podium herself, a father who managed the details nobody sees, a grandfather who chose a surface to train her on for a very specific reason, and an entire family that had to make a decision most parents never have to face, sending their child across the world before she had even finished growing up. None of that shows up in the highlight reel. None of that gets mentioned when commentators list her rankings and her wins, but it is the reason any of those wins exist at all. So before we get to center court, we need to go back to a hard court most people have never heard of and meet the people who stood there first. Let's start with the woman who arguably shaped this story more than anyone else. Rafa Nadal Eala was not just a supportive mom cheering from the stands. She was an athlete herself long before her daughter picked up a racket. As a teenager, she competed for the Philippines at the 1985 Southeast Asian Games and won a bronze medal in the 100-meter backstroke. She knew from personal experience what it actually takes to compete at a national level. Not from watching, from living it. That matters, because it means when Alex Eala started chasing something similar in a completely different sport, her mother was not guessing about the sacrifices involved. She already understood the training hours, the discipline, the years of work that happen long before anyone in the stands knows your name. And Rafa was not just an athlete. After her swimming career ended, she built a serious corporate career, eventually becoming the chief financial officer of Globe Telecom, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the Philippines, a position she held until 2024. So picture what that actually means. A woman running major financial decisions for one of the biggest companies in the country, while also raising 2 children who were both being pulled toward elite-level tennis. Her father, Mike Eala, is a business executive as well. And by most accounts, he handled a lot of the logistics behind the scenes, travel, scheduling, the kind of unglamorous groundwork that never makes it into a match recap but without which none of the matches happen in the first place. Then there is the detail that started this whole journey. Eala picked up a racket around age 4, and it was her maternal grandfather, Roberto Maniego, who first put it in her hands and coached her until she was 13. 9 years. Think about that commitment. 9 years of an aging man showing up day after day, teaching a young girl the fundamentals of a sport her own country barely paid attention to. And here is a detail that tells you exactly how deliberate this family was from the very beginning. Her grandfather specifically trained her on hard courts, even though most courts across the Philippines at the time were made of a completely different surface. He made that choice on purpose, because he understood that if she ever competed internationally, she would be facing hard courts far more often than the ones common back home. That is not casual parenting. That is a family thinking years ahead, preparing a 4-year-old for a stage she had not even dreamed of yet. She was not training alone either. Her older brother, Miko, trained right alongside her every single day after school, on that one hard court at their local country club. 2 siblings, one grandfather, one shared obsession, years before either of them had any proof it would lead anywhere. This is the part where you have to stop and really absorb what this family was doing. They were not chasing a guaranteed outcome. There was no established path for Filipino tennis players to follow. No blueprint. No previous success story to point to and say, "This is how it is done." They were building something from nothing, one afternoon at a time, based purely on belief in a child who had not yet proven anything to the rest of the world. If you are the kind of person who believes the real story behind success is almost never the story we get shown, this channel is exactly where you belong. Because what this family was quietly building in the background is about to be tested in a way that could have ended everything before it truly began. Because believing in a child is one kind of commitment, what came next would demand something far harder than belief. This is the part of the story that almost never makes it into a highlight reel, because it does not happen on a tennis court. It happens around a kitchen table, in a conversation most families never have to have. By the time Eala was around 12 years old, something had become impossible to ignore. She won the Les Petites, as one of the most prestigious junior tournaments in the world, a title that essentially functions as a launching pad for future tennis stars. And that win did something the family probably expected on some level but still had to actually confront. It caught the attention of the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain. Here is the mini question worth sitting with. What does a family actually do when their 12-year-old daughter suddenly has a real shot at an elite international academy thousands of miles from home, in a country where they have no relatives, no support system, and no safety net? Because this was not a small decision. This was not signing up for a better local coach or a slightly more expensive racket. This was potentially uprooting a child's entire life. New country, new language, new culture, away from her grandfather who had spent 9 years building her foundation, away from the country club court where all of this had started, away from everything familiar. And then there is the part almost nobody talks about openly, the cost. Elite tennis academies are not cheap. Even with a scholarship, which Eala did eventually receive, there are travel expenses, equipment, coaching fees, living costs, and the simple economic reality that this is a sport where success is never guaranteed, no matter how much money or belief you put into it. Thousands of young athletes with genuine talent enter programs like this every single year, and the overwhelming majority of them never become household names. The family had no way of knowing, in that moment, whether Eala would be the exception or one of the many who quietly fades out of the sport a few years later. So picture the actual weight of that decision. Do you keep her home, safe and familiar, in a country with almost no infrastructure for producing world-class tennis players, where her ceiling might always be limited no matter how talented she is? Or do you send her away, at 12 years old, based on nothing but a junior title and a belief that this child might be different? There is no clean answer to that question. Any parent who has ever had to choose between protecting a child and giving them a shot at something bigger knows exactly how impossible that decision actually feels in the moment. And it was not just Eala who would be affected. Her brother Miko was also on a serious tennis path of his own. So this was not a decision about one child. It was a decision that would reshape the entire family structure, potentially for years. Here is the second mini question, and it is the one that really cuts deep. What happens to a family when the parents are not physically there for the daily grind? The academy takes over a huge part of a child's upbringing during some of the most formative years of their life. Structure, discipline, friendships, even language, all of it starts happening away from home. Was that a sacrifice the family was willing to make in exchange for opportunity? And if it went wrong, if the talent never fully materialized, would it have all been worth it anyway? This is the part of the story that stays hidden behind every athlete's highlight reel. Not the wins, not the trophies. The quiet, terrifying uncertainty of a family betting everything on a child before there was any real proof it would pay off. Because from the outside, sending a talented young athlete to a prestigious academy looks like an obvious opportunity. From the inside, It looks like stepping off a cliff without knowing what is waiting at the bottom. And at some point, this family had to stop weighing the decision and actually make it. In 2018, the decision that could have gone in 100 different directions finally became real. Iga and her brother Miko packed their bags and moved to Manacor, Spain, to join the Rafa Nadal Academy. Not for a summer camp, not for a short training block. This was a full relocation, built around years of development, education, and a level of competition the family could never have replicated back home. Picture what that actually looked like from the inside. Two siblings, both still teenagers, stepping off a plane into a country where they did not speak the language fluently, joining an academy filled with young athletes from all over the world, who had also been told they were exceptional. Suddenly, Iga was not the standout junior champion from a country with almost no tennis tradition. She was one talented kid among dozens of talented kids, all chasing the same dream, all under the same roof. That shift alone is enough to break a young athlete's confidence. Being the best in your country means nothing when you are surrounded by players who were also the best in theirs. But here is what made this decision the true turning point of the entire story, and not just a change of scenery. The academy gave her something her home country structurally could not: consistent access to elite-level coaching, training partners at her level every single day, not once every few months. A system built specifically to develop future professionals, refined over years by people who had already done it before. Her grandfather had given her 9 years of foundation. Now that foundation was being handed to a machine designed to build champions. And she was not doing this completely alone. Having her brother there mattered more than most people realize. In a new country, surrounded by strangers, having family nearby, even if it was just one sibling instead of her whole support system, gave her an anchor. Someone who understood exactly where she came from, while everyone else around her only knew who she was becoming. Here is something worth pausing on. What do you think mattered more in this decision? The technical coaching she gained access to, or simply not being completely alone in a foreign country at that age? If you have ever had to start over somewhere new, drop your answer in the comments, because I think the response might actually surprise you when we get to what happened next. Because the academy did more than sharpen her game. It exposed her, daily, to a caliber of tennis that simply did not exist in the Philippines at the time. She trained under coaches who had shaped professional careers before. She was surrounded by an environment where excellence was not the exception, it was the baseline expectation. And there is a detail here that connects everything back to the family that raised her. Years later, when reflecting on everything that led to her breakthrough, Iga said something that cuts right to the heart of this story. She credited her family for laying the foundation before she ever arrived at the academy. Not the academy for creating her from nothing. Her family for giving her the discipline and the grit long before any elite coach ever worked with her. That single comment reframes everything you thought you understood about this journey. The academy did not build Alex Eala. It refined something her family had already spent 9 years constructing on a single hard court with a grandfather who had no way of knowing it would ever matter this much. She graduated from the academy in 2023, and in a detail that almost feels too poetic to be real, the guest speaker at her graduation ceremony was Iga Swiatek, the same player Iga would go on to beat just 2 years later during her breakthrough run in Miami. At the time, nobody in that room could have known what that coincidence would eventually mean. But we are not done yet. Because the sacrifice this family made was not a one-time decision that simply paid off on its own. What happened after the academy, and how that sacrifice kept echoing through every major win that followed, tells you something even deeper about what actually built this career. Let's connect what we just learned to what actually happened once Iga stepped onto the professional stage, because none of it makes sense without the family context we just walked through. Remember Miami, 2025. 3 straight wins over top 10 players. If you only knew the surface-level story, that run looks like a random explosion of talent. But once you understand what came before it, it stops looking random at all. That run was not luck. It was the direct output of a grandfather who trained her on hard courts for 9 years, specifically because he knew international competition would demand it. It was the direct output of a mother who understood, from her own athletic career, exactly what elite-level sacrifice actually requires. It was the direct output of a family that made the terrifying decision to send a 12-year-old across the world based on nothing but belief. Here is the proof that ties it all together. 2 years after graduating from the Rafa Nadal Academy, Eala faced Iga Swiatek during that same Miami run, the same Swiatek who had spoken at her graduation ceremony. And Eala won 6-2, 7-5. Not a close, lucky escape. A statement win against a former world number 1 on one of the biggest stages in the sport. Then, in July of 2026, it happened again, even bigger. At Wimbledon, Eala defeated Swiatek once more, this time as the defending champion, in one of the most historic upsets of that tournament. After that win, Eala broke down in tears during her on-court interview, and what she said in that moment connects directly back to everything this video has been building toward. She talked about training every single day after school with her brother and her grandfather, describing herself as a kid with ruffled socks and chubby cheeks, grinding away on that one hard court with absolutely no idea it would ever lead here. That is not a scripted soundbite. That is a 20-year-old, standing on the biggest stage of her career, instinctively going straight back to her family the moment the emotion became too big to hold in. And here is a detail that most highlight packages leave out entirely, because it does not fit the underdog narrative as cleanly. Some online commentators have pointed out that Eala's family had real resources behind her: private academy access, financial stability, a level of support many young Filipino athletes never receive, and a few have even called her a nepo baby because of it. It is a fair thing to bring up. Resources genuinely matter in a sport this expensive. But resources alone have never been enough to explain sustained wins over the best players in the world. Plenty of young athletes have access to money and elite academies and still never break through. What you cannot buy is 9 years of a grandfather showing up every single afternoon. You cannot purchase the decision to leave everything familiar behind at 12 years old. You cannot pay for the kind of resilience it takes to walk into a foreign academy as one talented kid among dozens of talented kids, and still find a way to rise above nearly all of them. The resources opened a door. The family is what walked her through it, and kept walking beside her every single step after. So rabbit to the beginning of this video. The image of Eala alone under the lights, the whole world watching her win. That image was never actually accurate. She was never alone up there. Every single win carried her grandfather's 9 years of patience, her mother's understanding of sacrifice, her father's quiet logistics, and her brother's presence in a foreign country when everything else felt unfamiliar. That is not a footnote to her story. That is the actual foundation the entire story was built on. So here is what this video has really been about. Not a tennis player who became great on her own, but a family that quietly decided, years before anyone was watching, to believe in something with absolutely no guarantee it would work out. A grandfather who trained a 4-year-old on the wrong surface on purpose because he was already thinking about a future none of them could see yet. A mother who understood sacrifice because she had lived it herself, on a podium, decades before her daughter ever stood on one. A father who handled the parts nobody claps for. A brother who left everything familiar behind at the same time she did, so she would not have to face it completely alone. None of that shows up in a scoreline. None of that gets mentioned when someone lists her ranking or replays her biggest wins. But every single time Eala walks onto a court now, that entire history walks out there with her, whether the cameras acknowledge it or not. And here is what makes this bigger than one athlete or one family. Somewhere in the Philippines right now, there is another parent looking at their child's talent and asking the exact same terrifying questions this family once asked. Do we send them away? Do we spend money we do not have? Do we believe in something before there is any proof it will pay off? This family did not just build one tennis career, They proved that a country with almost no tennis history could still produce a champion if a family was willing to bet everything on a belief nobody else shared yet. So what happens now? Eala is still climbing. Her family is still there, just quieter now, further from the spotlight but no less involved. And every future match, every future headline, is going to carry the exact same foundation you just learned about, whether anyone mentions it or not. If stories like this, the ones hiding underneath the highlight reels, are the kind of thing you actually want to understand, instead of just scroll past, this is exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe now, because the next chapter of this family's story is still being written, and when it happens, you are going to understand exactly what it took to get here long before anyone else does.